What is up, my little Danos? Vepsis here, bringing you guys a brand new series in my channel where I'm gonna be doing unofficial WBE power rankings throughout this season in their season 5 for their singles format, which you saw yesterday when Joey aka Pogi AMD did his live stream for the singles format, how the drafts went for each of the teams. And I'm gonna be focused on only for that side. If you're here for the doubles or anything like that, unfortunately I won't be breaking down throughout this season for the VCC format, because I'm personally a singles draft league player and I'm gonna be focusing on my series for that in itself. And this is gonna be unofficial because the WBE doesn't have actually analysts for this season, unfortunately. So because of that, I figured that it's a good idea for myself as a content creator do kind of unofficial work for that for my own channel, where I won't be using any of their graphics. And these graphics that I have are made by a good friend of mine, SlackOut, whose social links will be down below in the description, so make sure to check him out. But he helped me out regards to this, that I can provide this kind of content without breaking any kind of content creator rules, where I would be using their kind of graphics for something that I don't have my access to myself or have any kind of permission to use them. So this is gonna be my way of doing the power rankings. Hopefully you're gonna be enjoying these and you're gonna be one of the WBE fans that have found yourself here and you are still interested to have some sort of analyst content, and that's going to be something that I'm gonna be doing. And hopefully I get to see and hear from your perspective how you're gonna be feeling about their drafts in the down below in the description. But not further ado, let's jump into the power rankings for their drafts in the single format. I'm gonna be starting working bottom to top and break down each team from there, and then at the very end you're gonna be seeing overview how each teams were ranked. But now let's go and see who ends up being the number 16 in my power rankings for the WBE season 5 draft rankings. And as the number 16 team and the very last in my power rankings for the WBE Season 5 singles format will be PITTSBURGH, coached by James W. Big. And there are a couple of issues with this draft. Most importantly to me is that it lacks a lot of firepower and winning condition to its team, and it's hard to see on paper what are the mons that are supposed to be able to bring you to wins. You have some solid bulk and foundational teams for a good draft here, but it becomes really underwhelming when your main threats are basically setup Corviknight and a Conkeldurr, and then you have to start digging even deeper with some DREEPYS and Rhyperiors, which have good attack stat and can do some decent damage, especially something like Rhyperior with its dual stat, but that's definitely not enough for a draft team, even in a Galarian decks, to be successful from my point of view at very least. And this draft could have easily solved that issue, especially if there wasn't a couple of examples that are kind of redundant to have in the same draft. Starting with having a Mungus and DREEPYS on the same draft seems kind of wonky. Usually don't end up seeing two grass types being drafted, especially if both of them more or less so slow and defensive, which is the case right here. And DREEPYS doesn't really provide that much besides ghost typing and a rapid spin for this team, and this team doesn't seem like hazard stacking routing anyway, so having a rapid spin from DREEPYS is not as essential. And he has already 3 defogers on his roster as it is, so he didn't really need the remover aspect out of the DREEPYS. And the more funnier and weirder example is that he has Raboot and Torracat on the same draft, and while Raboot can run Libero unlike Cinderace, it's still kind of wonky to see both middle tier fire starters, or not middle evolution fire starters, to be drafted in the same draft, especially when the team kind of has bigger needs, which is the firepower in it. So it has a good foundation with the first 4 months, for example, but then it gets dicey from there, and that is basically why it is going to be ranked number 16. And now let's go see which team ranked as number 15. And as the number 15 in my power rankings will be GOOMYS, coached by Fruitberries. And this team as a whole has a lot of solid mons and not too many redundant mons that are doing similar things. So that is a big plus for this roster compared to the previous one, but a big minus in my opinion for this team, and why it's to 15 and not any higher than this, where it can potentially go higher if it would have changed some of the aspects on this roster, and mainly it is the speed tiers, because this team as a whole, the fastest one in the entire roster is the Haxorus, and it starts dropping very fast after that, so it's a very slow draft, and that is not good to have even in a Galarian deck where there aren't that many fast mons. There should be still enough, so this team should have been able to grab a little bit more faster things than the Haxorus, so which would allow Haxorus to be choice banded and set up more often than not. But now, because it doesn't have that opportunity as often, it's going to be potentially kind of nerfed in that sense, and he still has like Ditto to be a choice cover, which is very often to be run on it, but that's not always the most ideal choice cover that you want to run. So that's the biggest reason why this team is at number 15. Other than that, it's a pretty solid team, and I think there's a lot of potential in it if the changes would have been made, but until those are being done, it's gonna be ranked here. And now let's go and see what is going to be ranked as number 14. And as the number 14 team in my power rankings will be BATON Rogue BUTTERFREES, coached by That's+1. And there are a couple of things that this roster is definitely lacking that I think could have been done better, or are big flaws to this team. One, typing wise, this team is lacking a ground type similar to the very last team ranked on my power rankings. And this team having a semi-weather core in Kindra, Dreadnought and Politoed, and you don't have an electric immunity outside of Pikachu, that is a pretty big minus to me, and one of the biggest reasons why it's down here as well. But the other big thing that this team is sort of failed on being doing is that it didn't support its tier 1 pick being Tyranitar properly, in my opinion. It's kind of awkward on this roster, and it doesn't support its biggest weaknesses properly, barring a fighting weakness. You have a couple of ghost types to resist that, but you're lacking otherwise kind of ways to utilize Tyranitar in fullest potential, in my opinion. You could have used a couple of more Stealth Rockers on the team so that Tyranitar would not fulfill in that role, and some other things that would allow it to be thriving as its fullest potential, which is not the easy thing to do. Tyranitar is one of the hardest mons to get most out of in Draft League format in itself, and it arguably is one of the weaker tier 1 picks, and every single team can only have one mon from that tier, so whichever mon you pick from there, you gotta make it work in your draft, and to me it didn't really work out that greatly for this team. So those are the big things that kept this team as low as it is. The couple of things that kept, well, the big thing that it kept it above number 15 and 16 team were that it has a little bit more winning conditions to work with, and it can fulfill some sort of offensive game plan through its weather core, through Tyranitar if you can utilize it properly in a matchup. Mimikyu can try to win games on its own, so there are a lot of different setup threats and just a pure power on this team that I think it kind of outclasses the previous two, but it definitely has its flaws, and that is going to be why it's number 14. And now let's go and see which team is going to be ranked number 13. And as the number 13 team in my power rankings will be Wakanda Vivas, coached by Moet, and his roster compared to the previous ones has a little bit more going for it regards to what offensive winning conditions it has to be able to actually thrive through and find ways to win its matchups through Volcarona and Gyarados, which both are very deadly setup sweepers on their own rights. And to me, those two particular being on the same roster gave advantage over the previous two. And while this team shares some similar issues as the couple of the other teams earlier, having some mons that are a little bit redundant to have in the same team, and typing wise especially, because this team has 3 different water types. Granted, they have a different secondary typing that does help them not share all of the same weaknesses as pure water types would be, but still having 3 is kind of weird to have in its own. And then it has 2 bug types, it has 2 flying types, and 2 ground types, so there are a lot of similar typings on this team. And the speed tiers, while Galvantria does help with it on its own on 108 and with the sticky webs, that could have still been something that could have done better on this whole roster. And the defensive backbone is sort of there, but it's not the most efficient as well either. So there are some things that keeps it a little bit awkward to me and keeps it at number 13, but because of some of the pure strengths of some of the mons that he possesses in the Volcarona, Gyarados, even Duraludon or Sirfetch'd and things like that. They can be quite deadly versus few teams out there, and that is going to be the biggest reason why it's going to be number 13. So now let's go and see what it's going to be ranked as number 12. And as the number 12 on my power rankings will be Sin City Scissors, coached by PITCHUS, and this roster starts to be the very first one in this video that I think is definitely solid, but it still has a couple of issues that it keeps it as low as it is, and defensively wise and utility wise I think this is definitely by far the best team that we have seen thus far throughout this video, and the power rankings in itself are going further on top of it. But the one big thing that I think it hinders it quite a bit is that it's offensively quite challenged in itself, because while it has Necrozma, which is one of the best tier 1 mons out there, and this team in particular will be rely on it quite a lot to be able to win games, but because how solid it is, it definitely helps out this team a lot, but it has a lot of weight on its shoulders to be able to win these matchups going forward for this team. Silvally, we have seen, if you have followed APA main league from past season and from CHIMCHARGERS' point of view, we have seen that what upside that Silvally has now with setup sets as well, because multi-attack is now 120, so Silvally definitely can help out Necrozma to take a little bit weight off its shoulders as offensively offensive utility mon or a setup sweeper. And then there are a couple of other things like Mienshao, Jolteon and Braviary for example, or even Golurk can be a pretty solid offensive threat. But outside of that, defensively wise, as I said, it's very solid, but offensively wise, I think that's something that this team could have done a little bit better, and maybe this team was focusing on too much on the defensive point of view of things. But that is going to be my number 12 team, and now let's go and see what is going to be number 11. And as the number 11 team in my power rankings will be Dundee Diles, hopefully I didn't butcher it too badly, coached by Callum. And Callum's team actually is pretty cool in itself regards to that how many versatile mons he has on his roster. Every single thing, barring maybe Listen Rock Midnight, which I butcher I know as a name in itself. But other than that, he has a lot of mons that can be pretty cool in different ways and be used differently. And that's something that you can definitely use in your Vantage in Draft League format, so big plus to him for that. But a couple of things that I think this team could have done a little bit better would have been that the tier 1 pick could have been something a little bit more powerful than Blaze Cinderace. As you can tell, you cannot use Libero, and because of that, I think this team is kind of like, it's very good middle powerful mons, like a middle tierish mons all around. So you don't see a mon that is completely useless, but you don't have something that, oh, I have to face this thing, and it's going to be something that every single team has to fear for the most part. So I think that's something that I will be saying as a hindrance to this team. The other thing would be that this team could have used just a little bit more defensive backbone into it. It has some mons that can be somewhat bulky, but it doesn't have that much great bulk on it. That's pretty much it for this team. It has pretty good speed tiers, it has good hazard control, it has a lot of setup options, and Crimstar with dual screens can be useful or be a setup threat on its own. So there are a lot of cool things that you can do with this team, and hopefully that's going to be something that it can use to its advantage and perform better than necessarily the draft power rankings would be for this team. But now let's go and see which team is going to be ranked as number 10. And as the number 10 team in my power rankings will be ANTARCTIC, AEBISLASHES, as I'm sure I butchered it completely, coached by Visually. And this team at first glance it looked very awkward to me, but I had to rank it number 10 because I have to respect the offensive firepower that this team definitely still has, and a little bit more than some other teams that I rank below this one, and that therefore it's in my opinion still at least number 10, because Jirachi in itself can be very versatile, and Alakazam with its speed tier and now Pursuit being gone is a very big offensive threat, and when it's a 120 speed tier, that's pretty solid for Galarian decks. Diggersby is one of my favorite wall breakers out there, so without return even, it's still a very solid mon. I can say that from my personal experience, it's definitely still very solid, and that's gonna be a nightmare for a lot of teams to deal with. Then you have things like Primarina and Dragalsi as a very strong special breakers as well, and because of that and seeing all those threats being there, I cannot really go too low on this team and say like, yeah, it's bad, because it's going to be very tough to prepare for. Even though at first glance it looks awkward, the defensive bulk could be better, but it doesn't necessarily show at first glance what kind of amount of bulk this team actually has, because SCIZERS can be pretty bulky as we know, Primarina can be bulky, SCIZERS can be actually very bulky with its typing in itself. It actually is able to, with heavy duty boots, check quite a few things. And Palosan is pretty cool with reliable recovery and setting up rocks. Rotom Fan's own typing allows it to be more bulkier than it necessarily seems at first glance. And Scrafty and Tangle as well can be pretty bulky. So while the defensive bulk is kind of awkward looking, it's definitely still there. And therefore I think this team is going to be number 10. I think drafting wise, the couple of earlier teams, like the number 11 and 12, might be easier for people to use themselves in a percentual wise, but as a power, like ranking these in regards to the potential, I think this team has the most potential than we have seen thus far. So let's go and see which team is going to be ranked as number 9th. And as the number 9 team in my power rankings will be SCIZERS, coached by Fanatics, which I'm sure another team that I botched it completely, but his roster to me looks defensively wise a little bit more solid than the previous one, while at the same time sharing good amount of offensive firepower in it as well, with Kyurem, Hatrini, Lysanroc Dusk, Talonflame, Durant. So there are a lot of different and cool looking mons that I think are going to be very tough for teams to prepare for, and something that I think at first glance you might be sleeping on quite a bit. And defensively wise, go for Kriegers, Snorlax, Quagsire, even Roselia can be a pretty decent defensive core in itself and good enough for this team. But something that I really didn't like about this draft, that it was only number 9, where it could have maybe been a little bit higher for others, is that it doesn't have too many hazards on it. The only stealth rocker on the team is the Lysanroc Dusk, which I'm not really a fan of. The mon is solid for sure, I would love to try it myself in this generation, but being your only rocker, that's a big minus to me, and that's why I'm gonna be keeping where it is. And other than that, you have T-Spikes from Gopher Kriegers and from Roselia, and you have Spikes from Roselia as well, but that's pretty much all the hazards this team has. And while in this generation, heavy duty boots in a singles metagame has changed a lot and maybe taken a little bit off from how important hazards are, I think you still would like to have a couple of more stealth rockers, at least 2 very solid ones outside of Lysanroc, and then this team would have been really good. But that's pretty much the team in itself for number 9th, and now let's go and see what is going to be ranked as number 8th. And as the number 8 team in my power rankings will be coached by Chimpact, and his team being the Philadelphia Scissors. And this is a clear example where I really try to avoid to look who is the coach of the team and not allow that influence the ranking in this power rankings in itself, because if I would be considering coach as well, Chimpact will obviously be a lot higher than just 8th. But in the draft in itself, I ranked it number 8 is mainly because he has a lot of similar issues that a couple of other teams has had prior, that you have a lot of redundant typings or similar mons in your draft that you could have maybe added something different instead of trying to stack up a similar thing in your draft. You have 2 grass types in Appleton and Gorgeist, which both are very bulky, so I don't think he would have necessarily needed both. He has a Lucario, Scizor and Klefki for steel typing. Granted, they're a little bit different from each other, but I don't think the difference is enough to justify having all 3 of them in your draft. So those are the kind of things that I noticed on this team, that he could have done a little bit different choices, and then this team would have been way higher than it would be at 8. But as of right now, this being his team, I have to rank it where it is. But he has a very solid tier 1 pick in Zeraora, like top 3 pick from that tier in itself, which is gonna allow this team always have opportunity to win. He has good amount of setup options in Slurpuff, Sigilyph, Scizor in itself, so he can have some winning conditions to work with through that, and Zeraora can set up as well. And he has some decent bulk on his team as well, but also something that I forgot to mention, he does also have 2 defensive water types in Jellicent and Quillfish. I get Quillfish is your grounded poison type, and I really appreciate that Chimpact did prioritize that. But again, having 2 water types is also kind of weird when they are both defensive as well. So that's going to be the team itself. Also, I guess as a final notice is that Crocodile is the only stealth rocker, which is a solid stealth rocker. But as another thing that I would like to mention, that regards to having so many hazard setters on your team, maybe having another rocker would have been nice as well. But he has good amount of hazards. He has every single hazard in the game available to him, so that's gonna be something that I expect CHIMCHARGERS trying to utilize to his advantage. And with so many knockoff users on his team, he can get rid of the heavy duty boots from opposing side. So it has the potential in it. A little bit redundant on a few things as I mentioned earlier. And now let's go and see what is going to be ranked as number 7. And as the number 7 team in my power rankings will be the Detroit Steel Winds, coached by Seabat, or Crimson Seabat as formerly known. And his team looks very solid to me, but there's a one big typing that this team desperately would have needed, which is why it's going to be only number 7, where I feel like this is going to be a team that could have on paper ranked up a little bit higher, and I anticipated at first glance myself to do that. But the big typing that this team, to me, in my opinion, would have desperately needed, and which is going to be something that I think is going to be addressed on later on as the season progresses if it shows to be a big weakness, and that is going to be the lack of dark typing. You really need to have a dark typing on your roster, especially when your big offensive combination, which I really like as a together as offensive core. I like the fact that they are very well synergized together, at least offensive point of view, being the Gengar and Terrakion, but both of them sharing psychic weakness, and when you don't have a dark type to actually kill them yourself, is a little bit annoying. Granted, Gengar does have a stab shadow ball to hit them, Terrakion has access to Mega Horn, but switching into psychic types or potentially deterring them to be a setup sweeper with mono psychic stab can be really annoying when there are things like I don't think Mew was allowed, but Reuniclus was allowed, and I think that it was drafted. We saw Necrozma being drafted earlier, and there are some other psychic types as well, which can be very deadly to this team. And I think something like either Orbeetle or maybe Cloyster or something like that could have been changed into dark type, and this team would be all of a sudden a lot higher on my rankings. But other than that, it has a very good offensive presence into it. With the first 2 picks, it has a setup sweeper in Cloyster, which if it remains on the team and he can find a dark type, is still a nice asset to have. He has good amount of hazards. He has every single hazard in the game, similar to the previous team. That's a pretty nice plus. He has couple rockers, or actually 3 rockers on his draft if you count Terrakion as well to be one of them, which is pretty solid. And just overall wise, I think it's just really solid, but that dark typing that he's desperately missing is going to be the big thing why it's number 7. And yeah, that's going to be it for this team, and now let's go and see what is going to be ranked as number 6. And as the number 6 team in my power rankings will be Nijmegen Nasleeps, coached by Automatic, good friend of mine and someone who I actually help a good amount of time in his front offense for his draft league. So I sort of had influence on this, but not particularly. I was quite busy when he was drafting, so not all of the picks were necessarily something that I helped him with. And it's still a solid team for sure, and that's why it's number 6, but there are a couple of things that I would have personally changed from it. And the big thing that I would have prioritized on this team for sure would have been adding another elite speed tier mon alongside with Starmie, because that's the only thing that he has beyond base 100. Linoon is technically a base 100 mon, but you don't really view it that way because it's a Belitron extreme speed abuser as a late game winning condition, and we are going to be addressing on that mon a little bit later. But that is the big thing that I think this team could have done better. The good things about this draft that he has a very strong tier 1 pick in Aegislash. He has very good defensive backbone to go along with, and a momentum with Mandiboss, Galarian Weezing, Arcanine, Rotomo, Mudsdale. Even Mawile can be pretty decent as a defensive steel type to take pressure from Aegislash. So defensive point of view, there are good things going for it, and I think this team did a good job prioritizing value picks from tiers and utilize it that way properly. But the big other thing is that I think the Linoon pick, which he did, which is controversial because I know why he picked it. He wanted something from tier 5 that forces prep, and I can understand that. But personally, I would have changed that to address the speed tier issues that on this team. I added something else along with Starmie that can fulfill a elite speed tier role. He has sticky whips from Araquanid, he has good amount of hazards with a few rockers on his team, I think actually 2 being Marvel and Mudsdale. He has the sticky webs, he has toxic spikes, he has a good amount of hazard remover as well. So therefore I think it's still a solid team, and that's why it's gonna be number 6. But those couple of things, or mainly just the speed tier issue, if this team would have been able to fix that properly, it had the potential to be higher on this list. But that's going to be for the number 6 team, and now let's go and see who ranked as number 5. And as the number 15 in my power rankings will be Bullet Punch Club, coached by Uzi Gunner, someone who I know pretty well by now, being helping him throughout his previous time in the WBE. And for this season, for the draft, I haven't actually helped him building this draft, but I probably will be helping team building wise, so I don't know all of the inside information regards to why he made every single pick or where he got sniped on, all that kind of stuff. So regards to looking at from my point of view about his draft, it's still a solid draft, and why it's gonna be number 5th obviously. Starting with Hydreigon is a very solid tier 1 pick. I know from personal experience how good that thing is in a Galarian decks that we are using for this season in WBE, and not just being biased about it when it's my favorite mon. And Scolipede is going to be very solid offensive threat that people will be sleeping on, because not every single draft is going to be having nearly as solid checks to it. So that's gonna be, to me, something that people are gonna be sleeping on a little bit, how good it is in Galarian decks. But I think it's pretty solid still, even without now having access to C moves like it was usually used in Generation 7. And then he has pretty good value picks in Rotom Heat and Tangrowth. Some of his favorites like Passimian, he's very good coach to use Passimian to its fullest potential, as you may have seen if you watched his previous runs. And then he has some decent bulky mons in Stunfisk and Licky as well, to kind of pair with his other bulky mons that he picked earlier. So overall wise, pretty solid draft, good amount of speed control with Espeon and Scolipede, and then Hydreigon can be a solid scalper in itself, a decent amount of bulk, but not necessarily the perfect amount of bulk. And I start with that because I think this team could have had a little bit better fighting resist outside of Scolipede, Espeon and Togetic. I think that's something that he would have wanted, especially when his tier 1 pick is the Hydreigon. You want to support that. He covered the other weaknesses pretty well, but that one is the one that I think that, okay, you could have picked something else that is a little bit more solid and be able to bring almost every single week to support Hydreigon in that regard. And the other thing would be that I think just outside of the Espeon and Scolipede, maybe there could have been another offensive threat that is similar as fast as a Hydreigon, for example. Like that's kind of maybe a niche pick, but I think it could have used maybe a little bit more offense, and this team looks to be more defensively well put it than offensively wise. It might be challenged in some weeks, but I think it's still a pretty solid draft. Good amount of hazard control, good amount of hazard setters, especially compared to some other drafts earlier that we have seen. So overall wise, I would not complain about too much if I was Uzi Gunner with his draft. I think he can do pretty well with it. And now let's go and see who is going to be ranked as number 4. And as the number 4 team in my power rankings will be Pittsburgh PICHUS, coached by Nexus, one of the favorite people to watch in WBE from his commentary. If you haven't checked him out yet and his prior commentary, so make sure at least follow this season. This guy is hilarious, man, and his draft is scary, man, because look at his picks. Started with Rillaboom at tier 1 with SCIZERS and Clyde now access to it. That is going to be a scary mon, and definitely something that is not going to be or shouldn't be slept on too much as a tier 1 pick. Then he has a tier 2 Keldeo, which should have been tier 1 for sure, now access to Flip Turn. And then he has a tier 3 Weavile, which I'm kind of like, that's pretty cheap, man. That's too cheap for Weavile, man. Like, come on now. I know it lost Pursuit like a lot of dog types did, and some non-dog types that definitely used it to their advantage competitively wise. So it's still a loss for sure, but it got access to triple Axo, and once it lands all of those 3 moves, it's 120 base power move as a stab coming for a Weavile. So they should have not put that thing as a tier 3. That was a mistake, and Nexus took full advantage of it, and kudos to him. He has a very solid amount of other value picks like Drodigon as tier 4. I think it's gonna be pretty important member on this team, giving him stealth rocks for his hyper offense and be a little bit of defensive backbone. Gardevoir is pretty versatile and cool fairy type to utilize. Heliolisk as a tier 4 is pretty good electric type, considering how many electric types lost hidden power that they really needed for their coverage. Heliolisk will be having enough coverage to utilize it properly. And then he has Steelix as a tier 5, which is a very solid value steel type to pick from lower tiers. But then one big thing that you probably have noticed by now is that the lack of bulk on this team is the one that keeps it lower than it could have been. For example, like this team could have been easily been top 3 if this team had just a little bit more bulk on it. If you would have, for example, swapped Colosso to something else that doesn't share the big times for weakness with Salasso, that would have been better. If you maybe would have swapped the Hitmonlee as well, because you already had Keldeo for a little bit bulkier thing, and maybe added that hazard control through it as well, which Hitmonlee does give to this team, then this team would have been just absolute deadly, man. Like defensively wise, it's gonna be very challenged. Offensively wise, it's going to be challenging the teams to be able to stop it. So that's going to be the number 4 team. And now let's go and see who is going to be ranked as number 3. And as the number 3 team in my power rankings will be New York DREEPYS, coached by Joey aka Pocky AMD. And this team could have been easily also number 2, but I decided to go this as number 3 because I personally like the number 2 a little bit better, as you're going to go with. Or you're gonna be seeing later on what I should say. The number 1 team was already pretty much dead set for me when I saw the draft, but Joey's team is gonna be number 3 for me. He has a very solid sand core which he decided to build around with his tier 1 extra drill and a tier 4 gigalith, which is a very solid value pick when he decided to go the sand route. So that's a solid foundation. He has one of the best, if not the best, bulky water type right now in the Galarian decks with Slowbro. He has a Dragosaur to be a bulky water type killer. What do you want to have with extra drill from tier 3? He also has a tier 3 Sylveon, which is pretty good value and it goes pretty well with his Slowbro and Gigalith. Especially Gigalith can really appreciate the wish support, and it can support Sylveon's poison weakness and utilize it that way and be able to get wishes into that and give it longevity through it in itself. He has good amount of speed control outside of the sand with Noivern, Person, and even the Alolan Ducktail if he decides to utilize that in some weeks, even though he also has Execute, and I'm gonna be touching that a little bit later on. But besides that, he has good amount of hazard control with Noivern and Execute if he needs to, but he doesn't necessarily seem to be that weak to hazard, so at least to stealth rocks outside of Noivern and Vanilluxe. And then he also has hazard setters in the Gigalith, in the Exegil, and the Rose Raid gives him spikes or T-spikes if necessary. And then he also has the Vanilluxe to set up Aurora Veil for his setup mods like the Exegil in itself if he needs to, and that's one of his like favorite mons from APA main season, so I expect him to get a good value out of it yet again. And yeah, like to me, everything else, maybe barring, or definitely barring the Alolan Ducky, to me looks very solid and has its purpose here, so that's why it's gonna be so high on the list. The thing that I would have liked to see from the Alolan Ducktail, that it could have been something a little bit different. I cannot pinpoint right now what it could have been, besides maybe being another good offensive threat. I think it should have been something else and been offensive for this team and give us some other utility options through there. Maybe a very deadly setup sweeper would have been nice, because he has the Veil, he has the potting shot from the Alolan Person, and I don't really see him necessarily needing to bring Alolan Ducky too often, if ever, when he already has Execute to abuse the sand and just literally with the same typing. So I think that's like literally the one thing that I would have liked to see from Joey, so it could have been able to challenge for number 2 spot for sure, and maybe even for the number 1 spot in my power rankings. But that's going to be it for my number 3, and now let's go and see who is going to be number 2. And as the number 2 team in our power rankings will be MILWAUKEE SALISBUCHOS, coached by Steve aka Magnitude, the champion in our hearts if you've watched the last season finals when he went up against Kyle A, and he won the battle, but then he ran an illegal move at the time on his Vaporeon, which is really sad to see, because all of us probably were very happy to see the creator of the Draft League finally win his championship in his first ever playoff run. But I hope that this season will be the case that he can do that. Honestly, for his sake, it would be really cool to see. And he has a drafted potential to pull it off. He has a very solid tier 1 pick with Komoa, which can be very versatile. And we know Steve can build very different ways and make it very unpredictable. And it also, I believe, can use the Omni boosting move throughout this season. So that's pretty cool for his tier 1 pick. Very solid synergy with Ferrothorn and Chandelure together when you think about it. Perfect synergy, at least Ferrothorn's side of view covering its 2 weaknesses perfectly. He has Barraskewda, which is one of the sleeper picks in this season. I'm gonna call it right now before it happens. Barraskewda is going to be one of the best revenge killers that we may give credit for. Like outside of Dragapult and Zeraora, which both got drafted, this is the 3rd fastest Mon. And without Rain, I think this Mon as a tier 3 is a solid revenge killer with its speed here, and access to flip turn gives it momentum, so it's not always just gonna be useless when a bulky water type comes in, unless it's immune to water stabs as a whole. So I think that Mon is gonna be something in our college right now before we get to see it. And he got a tier 3 Real Nucleus, which is a very good value for his team, and synergizing pretty well his draft as well. And he has good amount of hazard control, he has a good amount of immunities that you want to have typing wise as well, and he also has good amount of hazards on his team. He kind of looks like a semi-rain team, so maybe he got sniped on from Politoed. I don't have the inside information to that, but maybe we get to hear if he was, because his draft sort of has the rain vibes to it with Mantine, Barraskewda and Ferrothorn, so maybe we get to see him running manual rain every now and then. We know Steve, he can be very unpredictable, so I would not be necessarily surprised looking at his team. And then he has some decent value in Cinccino, Manectric and Sandslash. Not necessarily my personal favorites, but I can see their reasoning in this draft and what they provide to this team. So that is going to be the team for number 2 in my power rankings, and now let's go and see who ranked as number 1. And the number 1 team in my power rankings, you probably already saw it coming, obviously it's going to be Envy, and he's San Diego CHIMCHARGERS, and he has a very deadly team, something that I would personally love to draft, and that's probably something that I will admit that it has a lot of bias into it, because he has a monster that I have used in the past in Draft League format separately, or even drafted them together myself too. Starting off with the Dragapult, one of the best, if not the best Mon right now in the Galarian decks in Generation 8, as we are currently are, before we get more Mons back. Then he has solid value picks in Tier 2, Togekiss is a very solid Fairy type. Tier 3, Mamoswine and Obstagoon. Not just separately wise, those are insane value picks, but getting them together, my goodness, the wall breaking potential that those two have, it's just to help out Dragapult offensively wise, is gonna be insane. He has Sprong Song. Very solid, very predictable steel type what it tends to do, but it does its job very well from tier 4. Centiskorch, one of my favorite, if not my favorite Gen 8 Mon to use in this generation, weirdly enough. I'm biased about it, I love using it myself, and as a tier 4 I think it's perfectly fine as a price wise, but I definitely like what it can provide to this team. And again, it provides him like a ice resist, fairy resist, fighting resist, which a lot of his mons will appreciate in itself, and a fire immunity as well. And from there he has also Runerigas, solid hazard setter. He has good amount of hazard setters as a whole. He has like 4 stealth rockers on his team. He has T-spikes from Runerigas. He has sticky webs from Shuckle. He has even decent amount of removers, I guess 2 to be exactly in Togekiss and Skuntank, but his draft is not that hazard weak when Centiskorch wants to run boost pretty much every single week in itself, and Togekiss might be able to use those quite well in some weeks as well. So overall wise, very solid draft. The one thing that I would have loved this team to be able to do, or changed it in his draft, was that Shuckle. I get 100% that Sticky Webs with Mamoswine and Obstagoon is too tempting to pass up potentially, because if he gets those up and those two can go in and outspeed everything without being Choice Scarf, Jesus Christ man. But I think personally, because it's not the most reliable Sticky Weapons out there and reliable monster to bring, because it's kind of gonna do only that thing, and I don't like Shuckle personally because of that, for that kind of usage, or as a whole it cannot really do anything else. I think he could have changed that to have something else alongside Virizion and Dragapult to be base 100 or beyond speed tier. I think that would have made this draft pretty much like as perfect as it gets in a Galarian deck. I'll say that. I think that would have been the one thing I would have changed on it. But other than that, it looks really good on paper. He has all the typings that he needs. He has the proper offense, good amount of defense, good amount of hazard setters. Removers wise, only 2, but it's good enough to make it still number 1. So that is going to be for this number 1 team. And now let's go to the overview and see the whole rankings. And then we can kind of wrap it up from here. And that is going to be my unofficial power rankings for the drafts in the WBE Season 5 for the single format. Let me know in the comment section below what would have been your top 16 in this season in the WBE comparison to my own, for example. What things you agreed on, what things you disagree with me, and all that good stuff. This is basically what I want to hopefully to see throughout this series as I'm doing, that I get to hear from your perspective, because I know as a fan of draft pick format for many years, I love this kind of stuff when leagues were able to provide back in the GBA days or when the WBE was able to do so. Hopefully I get to hear from your point of view, how would you have ranked things, why, and what things you agreed and disagreed from my point of view, how you like this, and hopefully you're looking forward for next week when I will be uploading kind of like a week 1 recap, very efficient way to do it. And as an overview, I'm always gonna be ranking very briefly as well how the teams were able to do in each week, and I have that as a little series going on from here from my point of view. So stay tuned for that. Subscribe if you're new, like this video if you enjoyed, and I'm gonna be leaving a couple of playlists as well on the screen if you're new on this channel and you want to check out my draft league content that I've been able to provide in the Generation 8. Make sure to check them out, and until next week and until next time, I'm gonna be seeing you guys later.